Hey, Rob Bowser here, Anti-Method Golf, and this week we're just going to go through pre-swing. And for us, when I say pre-swing, we're going to look at it from face on and down the line, and I'm talking about all your setup, all the setup variables. So ball position and hand position and kind of width of stance and um, posture, and so your grip. And so we're just going to walk through and just kind of talk about where we see tour players and the ranges. And again, that's the goal when we look at things like this, is to really kind of help to share where we see tour players, and what the range of acceptability is, and then hopefully give you some tests so you can check it on your own and see where you fall. So here's the first one. We'll look at Nick Price from face on. He's hitting an iron, and so that ball position is about in the middle of his stance. It looks like about a 7-iron that he's hitting, give or take a little bit. It's pretty much in line with the middle part of his body. So his head is not behind the golf ball with an iron. I feel like that's a pretty common myth that we hear out there. So with the driver, as we look at players with drivers from a face-on standpoint, that that's something that you could kind of say is true. So on a driver, here's Dustin Johnson. Yes, his head is definitely behind the ball if we draw a line down from his nose, but that's not true with an iron. And the reason that is the way it is because with an iron, we're trying to hit down on the golf ball, and with the driver, we're trying to catch it more where we're sweeping it or maybe even catching it on the upswing. So having the ball more forward and having our head more behind the golf ball at both address and impact with the driver helps us to catch it more on the upswing. So in addition to that, we'll just kind of look at some of the things that we see as far as hand position is concerned at address. And so, oftentimes with a driver, we'll see the shaft leaning backwards slightly, and that's just because the golf ball is forward and the hands are off the inside of the left thigh. So here you can see a very similar hand position between Aaron Baddeley with the driver here and Nick Price with an iron. But as the feet widen and the ball moves forward, the shaft goes from kind of leaning towards the target with an iron to leaning slightly away from the target with the driver. And again, there's function behind this. These variables influence whether you're going to hit down on a golf ball. So the more the shaft leans forward at address, the more, in theory, you're setting up to hit down on it. And with the driver, when the ball's more forward, the shaft leans slightly back. So it's not really because the golfer has changed their hand position. The hands tend to be off the inside of that front leg. If we box those hands and the camera's in the right spot, whether someone's hitting an iron or a driver, their hands are always off the inside or very close to off the inside of their front leg as they move back. So let's just look at a couple others. Ernie, you can see again, roughly the hands are off the inside of that front thigh, and that doesn't really change as we look at Ernie with a driver. His hands are still off the inside of his front leg, but because the ball's forward and his feet are wider, now at address the shaft doesn't have much or any forward lean to it. Okay, we'll look at a few more from face on, and just to kind of get a sense of kind of ranges that we see. So here's Justin Rose, and it's hard to say with the shot that they're trying to hit, but definitely on this one, Justin has a lofted iron, looks like an 8 or a 9 iron. He's got the ball middle, and his hands and body are very much on top of / in front of the ball. Kind of on the other side of that, where we say this is why we always talk in ranges here. If we look at some other players, Ernie Els, the ball is going to be more opposite his logo. And that's kind of the range we see, anywhere from the sternum to the logo, maybe to just a little bit kind of towards the armpit there with ball position for, here's Tiger, with ball position for an iron for most tour players. So some of them it kind of comes up and hits their left ear. Some of them it kind of hits them more in the chin. The thing that's important that changes as we look at some drivers from face on, one of the things that is very much common, not common, I'd say it's a fundamental with a driver, is when we look at tour players, the golf ball, when we draw a line up, so it's Ben Hogan, their left ear is always going to be behind the ball. So you can see here both Ben Hogan and Jason Dufner have a lot of backward shaft lean at address, but you know, it's not because they're setting up and they're going, I'm going to put my hands way back. It's more a function of width of stance and ball position, which gives us that kind of backward shaft lean look. Here's Sophie. As we draw a line up here, we can see it kind of, again, hits her left shoulder, ball positions forward, shaft leans slightly back, but her head and her left ear are well behind the golf ball. So when someone says stay behind it, good advice with the driver would hold true when we look at tour players, but not so much as we look at tour players hit an iron. They're going to be more centered on the golf ball to help them hit more down on it. We'll look from the target line view and just kind of walk through a couple things that we see when it comes to different players from down the target line view. So we've got Jay Haas on the left, we've got Freddie on the right. So one thing that I look at is kind of the spacing. How far is the butt end away from the thigh? So right in here, and we often say about a hand span between the butt end of the club and your thighs. So if you took your right hand off the golf club, you should be able to pass it between the butt end of the club and your thighs. That's a rough or a loose checkpoint. You definitely wouldn't want 4 or 5 hand spans in there, because that's going to be an indication that you're too bent over, that your weight's too much out on your toes. So about a hand span, and definitely kind of feel like your weight's over the middle part of your feet. The other thing that we see is kind of, as far as the location of the hands from this angle, the shaft, as we draw a line up the shaft, it pretty much hits around the belt line. So plus or minus a little bit. So kind of belt line to the navel, or we can find some that are just below the belt line as well. But that, like if we look at Ryan Moore, he's got extremely low hands, so kind of the lowest that we'll see on tour. We're more likely to see someone on tour err on the lower side of the belt line than up above the navel. But it's the same whether it's an iron or it's a driver. And so the point that I want you to kind of think about is that the hand position, not only the distance it is away from your body, but the height of your hands is pretty much constant. So here's Tiger with an iron. Again, that shaft comes up and intersects right about in the midline of his body. The other things that we see from a down the target line view are a one-arm look. So as I look at Freddie Couples, you really kind of can only see one arm. Same thing here with Tiger. Oftentimes with recreational golfers where their right shoulder gets really high and out of position, you see that right arm above the left. And when that happens at address, you'll usually see a golfer who's swinging out to in as far as their swing path is concerned. We look at Rory, very much a one-arm look. So he doesn't quite have a hand span, but there's a little bit of daylight in there at his address position. Nick Price, again, similar to a hand span. We draw the line up. It's about at the belt line. So those are some things just to think about. So, you know, about a hand span off the body, and as we look from a face on, we see really pretty consistently the hands, whether the golfer's hitting a iron or a driver, the hand position is always somewhere up, kind of right off the inside of that left thigh is a good checkpoint, and there's a little bit of daylight or space between the butt end of the club and the thighs. Okay, this week's Rob Report on the pre-swing, antimethodgolf.com. Thanks, we'll talk to you soon.